This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
This week on the podcast Spark and Fire, visual artist Mark Bradford.
People always ask, well, didn't you know when you were in 5th grade and you were creative?
Mark has to learn how to embrace himself as an artist and find what he needs to create.
I didn't grow up like that. Thought it was just Mark being Mark.
On Spark and Fire, creators from different fields share their stories to fuel your creativity. Spark and Fire is a Wait What original in partnership with the BBC. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Wake Up to Money from BBC 5 Live.
Hello, welcome to Wake Up to Money with Rob Young today. On the show this morning, if you've been holding out, has the heating finally gone on? We'll be taking a look at the impact on businesses as the temperature dips below freezing. Also this hour, could anti-strike legislation be forced through to stop walkouts? And is any film really worth 285 million quid? Well, that is how much the latest Avatar film has cost to make, but can it make it back at the box office?
The voice of the UK. This is 5 Live.
You're live on Radio 5 Live.
A huge goal.
Hey, listen.
Listen live on digital, online, smart speaker, or the BBC Sounds app.
Very good morning to you. Hope you're well. Hope you're warm. I had to put an extra layer on this morning. It is chilly, isn't it? Welcome to Wake Up to Money on Wednesday, the 7th of December. It is just after 5 o'clock, and it is indeed very chilly around the country. There are yellow weather warnings in place for Scotland at the moment, for snow and ice for England later on today, as we were hearing just in the news there. I think this is definitely going to be one of those days where people are posting pictures on social media of their temperature gauges from in their car. I didn't check mine this morning. If you've woken up to a bit of a winter wonderland, we'd love to hear from you. If you're perhaps putting the heating on for the first time, let us know. Text 85058. But this first cold snap of the winter may well be a real test for many of us, not just at home, but also for businesses who are trying to keep their energy costs down. Potentially also a test for Britain's energy supply network as demand rises. You may remember that last week National Grid considered implementing its first blackout prevention scheme, which pays certain households to reduce their usage, but in the end decided it didn't need to do it. We're going to be talking about that this hour. With us this morning, Zareen Mancher, founder and chief executive of Travel Scotland, which is an online booking platform which promotes tourism. Welcome to the programme, Zareen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It'll be cold in Scotland this morning, but you're not in Scotland. You're in Spain, where I suspect it's a little warmer.
It is slightly warmer, but you can feel the chill here as well this morning.
Oh, really?
Just for anybody that's feeling slightly...
8 degrees, is it?
Around 8 degrees at the moment, yes. Just for anybody who might be feeling envious at the thought of Spain, it's not that warm here either.
Yeah, but I suppose when it comes to your business, Travel Scotland, if people are heading to Scotland at this time of year, they want the cold, do they? Or certainly at the very least they're expected and prepared for it.
Absolutely. We have to remember that there's people from all over the world who are in much warmer climates who the thought of snow is very, nice. So there's people that do travel to Scotland just for the colder weather, in fact.
Right, they love it. They can't get enough of the chill, eh?
Well, we've got some great skiing resorts there as well, don't we? So,
indeed. Now, you set your business up during the pandemic, which is perhaps quite counterintuitive in a way, because that was a time when many businesses thought they wouldn't survive, and indeed many companies didn't survive. It must have been a pretty turbulent time. What made you decide to do it then?
Well, my background, I already had a web solutions, web design company based in the northwest of Manchester. And at the time, this was just before COVID had kicked us, really. I had basically really started working on developing the Travel Scotland brand. And really, it was COVID that had definitely come in the way and pulled that setback. But it gave us time really to develop the platform and to work on it, and to just make sure that when we did launch that it was going to have an even bigger purpose, which it did, because when we did launch, there was a lot of businesses just coming out of recovering from COVID, really. And so we felt that it gave us an even greater purpose in being there for businesses to help support them back to their feet.
And how's it going?
It's been great. It's been absolutely great in terms of the launch. We launched in the last year, and we've been really building that community of businesses within the travel and hospitality. There is some exciting stuff happening with Travel Scotland in terms of developing it. But again, Travel Scotland, even though it's one of our big projects, I'm also the founder of BizWomen as well, which is an organisation, a community organisation based in the northwest of England. And so there's a lot of interaction that I have with businesses through BizWomen, through Travel Scotland. These are business communities.
Yeah, because you're in Spain today, but you're generally based in the northwest of England, yet have a Travel Scotland company. Just explain briefly the geography there.
So I'm kind of split between these two places, Manchester and Scotland and Glasgow, really. I was born in Scotland. I kind of was raised in Scotland before I moved to Carlisle, and then decided that Manchester was the place for me. And since then, I've been kind of crossed between Manchester and Glasgow.
Okay, terrific. Well, we're going to talk to you a bit more about your business, but also get your perspective on some of the stories we'll be covering on the programme today, so do stay with us. Also with us today, Fiona Cincotta, who's a market analyst at the firm City Index. Morning to you, Fiona.
Good morning.
Is it chilly where you are?
I guess so. I've actually just got the heating on. I haven't ventured outside yet, so I'm guessing it's going to be a cold blast when I do open that door.
Yeah. Is it the first time turning on the heating, or have you had it on for a bit?
No, do you know what? I was really trying. I was saying, no, I'm going to really be careful here. But then it got to a couple of weeks ago and there was a bit of a cold snap, and I was like, no, it's got to go on. So I do have it on, but I'm trying to be careful with it, just very much in the mornings and in the evenings.
Very sensible. Does the cold snap, and it's going to be with us for a couple of weeks, at least we think, does it have an impact on what businesses perhaps benefit or suffer on the economy overall?
Yes. I mean, this has been sort of, one of the big sort of costs that I think people are going to be very aware of going into, being in this cold snap. It's the cost of heating properties. Energy costs have gone up extraordinarily since the Russian invasion into Ukraine, and when energy prices went soaring. But this is really the first time that we're really going to be experiencing that huge jump in energy prices because of the heating going on and being on. And, businesses do need to warm those properties, and obviously people do need to warm their houses. So it's not something that we're necessarily going to be able to avoid, but I do think it's something that consumers are going to be very aware of, that they're going to need to sort of rein in spending elsewhere in order to be able to direct it to energy bills.
Yeah, we'll be spending a bit of time talking about the weather and its impact on energy this hour. Thank you for now, Fiona. Fiona's going to stay with us for the whole programme as well. But let's turn to the impact of energy prices on businesses, because the Federation of Small Businesses has said that 1 in 4 small firms is seriously considering closing, restructuring or reducing staff to cope with rising costs. And the insolvency advisory firm Mazars has said it has seen an increase in the number of energy companies seeking the closure of firms because of unpaid bills. It is quite rare still, but up from 7 to 20 companies compared to the same period last year. We're going to talk to a couple of people about this. Stuart Race, who runs a wool shop in the village of Long Melford in Suffolk. Stuart's fixed contract with his energy firm expired at the end of November. Morning to you, Stuart.
Morning, Rob. Nice to
also
speak to you.
with us, Martin McTague, who chairs the Federation of Small Businesses. Morning, Martin.
Morning, Rob.
So what are businesses overall telling you then, Martin?
Well, I mean, this has been a really clumsy and heavy-handed approach by the big gas companies, and or energy companies in general. See, they seem to apply a completely different standard to individuals compared with businesses. And when it's compared with the way banks are forced to treat customers that have got difficulties, it's really stark. I mean, there's a whole series of poor practices, but this culminates in effects that really defeat the objects of the energy bill and the relief scheme. And when you think that there are 16 million people working for small businesses up and down the country, and that in the last two recessions, they were desperately needed to try and help us recover from it, this is going to have a massive impact. For many of them, their bills have tripled. And this, as you said, is going to force a lot of them to either close or downsize or radically change their plans.
So your survey found that 1 in 4 businesses is considering closing, restructuring or reducing staff. I mean, there is a world of difference between perhaps putting somebody on part-time working and then shutting down the whole operation. I mean, are you able to give us a bit more detail on those figures? How many companies are potentially at risk of going under because of their energy bill?
Well, our report showed that there were 1 in 4 were considering closure, and that 1 in 10 were on the point where they felt that there wasn't any realistic future of trying to proceed after they got to the April 1st deadline. Because if you think of, I think it was 1 in 5 had their bills either tripled or more. If you've got a significant chunk of your outgoings that's dependent on energy, then that can be absolutely fatal to your business prospects.
Now, you mentioned April there. That is the time when the government's energy subsidy scheme for businesses is due to expire. How is it then that some companies have had their bills triple when there is this government help in place?
Well, when I say it's been tripled, that was tripled before the energy support came into place. Now, they could expect, therefore, to go back to that situation after April. They know, many of these business owners, that they're not in a position to cope with those kind of increases. So they have to plan for the future. And if you think of a business owner that's worked their whole life to try and build up a reasonable business, they may be dependent on loans that are secured against their homes. This is a time when they'll be thinking, I can't carry on any longer. I could lose the family home, and therefore they'll be considering closure.
All right. Stay with us, Martin. I want to talk to Stuart about his experiences now. I mean, is it chilly in Long Melford this morning?
Yes, and it was yesterday as well with the frost too. So that's causing me issues already.
Yeah, although you do run a wool shop, and I suspect this is the time of year, particularly on a day like today, when many people might be thinking, you know what, I think I need a new jumper.
Absolutely, that knit it. That I know, and I know we jest about that, but that's what I'm telling a lot of the ladies and gents who come in. I run a social group every morning in my shop, and I've been saying to them, prepare for December the 1st because I don't want to put the heating on. So you have to get your woolly knits out and knit quicker. But that is the reality that I've said to them, that my contract ran out literally the 30th of November. And I've been spending the month trying to get new quotes. And I kid you not, for me, just a self-employed, just me on my own in my little shop, the bills are horrendous. So I have got my old contract was delightful. It was 16 pence a day rate, which in the summer, that was about £10 a month. And in the winter, when I put the radiators on to keep the shop warm, £40 a month. My latest quote for renewal, which I have signed with because it was pretty much the best one, it's gone up to a service charge of 38 pence, and normally it's now 75 pence a day. So that's 4.6 increase. So my winter bill, that's normally 40 quid, is going up to £184 a month. And that is literally from having the radiator on. I'm a tiny shop, so my electricity is hardly anything. It's the laptop. It's the broadband, but I've got to keep that shop warm. It's a beautiful old building. It's a listed building, so you can imagine how cold they get.
So it's not particularly energy efficient then, I imagine.
No, not at all. And I'm trying my best to make improvements because I could see this coming. They give you warning when your contract's going to come to an end. And when I was getting the quotes from all the suppliers, and some of them were nearly £1 a day rate. So I could see it was going to be difficult. And I really have to have a warm shop. I can't have the whole point of those social groups. And some of those social groups are really important for ladies and gents. It might be their only one day out to see people. So I don't want to say no to them in a bid to try and, right, well, I can't afford to put the heating on. So that's where I'm seriously at now, is do I say, all right, I'm going to close our social groups for the next 3 months. I'll see you again in April.
Because you don't make money from those social groups, do you?
I do. I do. But it's knowing that bill is going to come from £40 a month, which is what it used to be with the radiator on, to £184. And I'm only a little wool shop. You can imagine the footfall from that. I don't know how many months I can keep paying that amount, that extra amount, and it's unclear what I'll get from the government, because my supplier just says, "Oh, it will come off your bill in December and January," and it's and already I can see my direct debit's gone up. So I am thinking about, well, what do I do to counteract knowing I've got to pay that extra money? So I'm already like making curtains for the shop, like the clappers, to try and keep the draft out, keep the heat in, to try and make the best. When that radiator goes on, how can I keep that heat in as much as possible?
Yeah. Martin, what do you make of what Stuart's been saying there, and particularly the response of his energy company, and also the fact that he doesn't really feel that yet he's getting that help from the government?
Yeah, Stuart's example is very typical of lots of small business owners up and down the country. And we're seeing really poor practice from some of these energy businesses, banging up standing orders and insisting on upfront payments. But we've written to the Secretary of State and said, look, I think it's very important that small businesses, especially micros, which are not significantly different from your average consumer, are given the protection after April. Otherwise, you could see a massive downsizing in a lot of these businesses. We've also written to Centrica, EDF, E.ON and the rest to try and get them to treat their customers with a bit more sympathy. And so far, we've had no response.
So we heard from Stuart there about the day rate, the standing order amount that has gone up by quite a bit. The government's relief scheme for businesses covers the unit cost of energy used, doesn't it? So what is your view of the increases you've seen in both the unit cost and those standing charges?
Well, the unit cost is something that the government is prepared to underwrite. They've already said they will. It's the standing orders and the upfront payments I think are particularly sneaky. And it's a way in which some of these businesses are not taking their responsibilities to the communities seriously. And I think the government needs to make it clear that if they're going to be spending billions on supporting businesses, and these energy companies are going to undermine them by either heavy-handed tactics like issuing winding up orders, banging on extra charges, or insisting on upfront payments, then that's completely counterproductive.
Right. So you do want the government to step in here then, do you? Because I know you have been writing to the energy companies. What kind of response have you had? Zero
response. At the moment, I think they have to realise that the whole community's in this battle, right? I think several politicians have made the point that this is a fight against Putin's illegal war, and we all have to take our responsibility. And at the moment, it seems to me that some of these energy companies are not taking their responsibility seriously.
Stuart, just back to you for a final word on this, if we can. When your customers are coming into your shop and they are talking about perhaps what winter woolly they're going to knit, what's the top colour wool this year? Or maybe it's a combination of colours.
Oh, it's got to be merino wool or British wool. British wool, since that's a whole other topic, Brexit. But wool, I'm now trying to supply and buy in more British wool. So we are slowly making more, which is wonderful. So good 100% British wool will keep you warm for sure.
Hear to that. Stuart Race, thank you very much for joining us from the village of Long Melford in Suffolk, and also thank you to Martin McTague, who chairs the Federation of Small Businesses. Another quick word with Zareen Mancha, our guest this morning, who runs Travel Scotland and also Biz Women in the north west of England. Particularly when it comes to your Biz Women network, What are small business leaders saying to you about their business energy bills and how they're hoping to be able to cope this winter?
Yeah, we've had some really heartbreaking conversations with some business owners. I had one yesterday with a business dessert shop located in the northwest of England who said that people aren't spending as much due to the cost of living and all these energy bills going up, and that they will actually, as a result of not being able to afford the bills or try to save money where they can, they're closing the shop on certain days. And that was heartbreaking to hear from them. So these are the other kind of businesses that aren't located in, for example, a shop type scenario. Because of business premises prices going up, it has pushed a lot of small businesses to consider co-working spaces or not being in the city centre or being centrally located as much. And so these are the kind of scenarios. It's making people think, obviously, about expenses and how they can save money.
All right, thank you for now. We had a couple of texts in on this. Mike, who's listening, says perhaps Stuart could ask the members of the group that he was talking about. Potentially you may have to axe that group for a couple of months, or whether they have any ideas or if they can help you. May be surprised how generous some people can be, says Mike. And somebody who hasn't left their name here says he's still not got any vouchers from his energy company and they don't answer the phone. Not everybody is online. David sent a text. Great show today. Should perhaps be rebranded Wake Up to Woolies. We'll pass that on to the boss. Cheers, David. Let's look at some of the other stories around today. We're going to head across to the US because in a blow for the former president, the Trump Organization has been convicted of tax crimes by a jury in New York. Donald Trump's namesake company has been accused of providing off-the-books benefits to executives. Well, our North America correspondent Michelle Fleury can explain a bit more for us.
Is this the end of the Trump Organization? Well, we know that Donald Trump's namesake real estate company could face a maximum of $1.6 million in fines when it is sentenced in mid-January. Generally speaking, that is a relatively small amount of money. It could weather that. The real issue is what would happen to the company going forward. It now has a felony conviction, and that could hurt its ability to do business here in New York. It could hurt its ability to obtain loans and also when it comes to completing contracts. So that is a space to watch. As for Donald Trump himself, the guilty verdict comes as he is under scrutiny by federal and state prosecutors. There is, of course, the handling of classified documents, the effort to overturn the 2020 election results. But sort of closer to home here in New York, if you look at the statement from the Manhattan District Attorney who brought this case, Alvin Bragg, he said this was a case about greed and cheating. So here we are, 3 weeks after the former president announced that he was running again for president in the United States in 2024, and his legal woes are mounting.
Michelle Fleury there in New York. Well, Donald Trump has said in a statement he's disappointed with the verdict in Manhattan but will appeal. He's also said it is a continuation of what he called the greatest political witch hunt in the history of the US. New York City, he says, is a hard place to beat Trump as businesses and people flee that once great city. Well, there was another blow, perhaps, to Donald Trump, as we were hearing in the past hour or so, where Democrats cemented their control of the US Senate after they won that bitterly fought seat in Georgia. Let's talk to Fiona Singh-Cotter again, City analyst from City Index. We're not going to talk about Donald Trump with you, Fiona, but we're going to look ahead to some results we got out a bit later this morning. Mitchell's in Butlers, the big pub group, employs over 40,000 people. It has been a rough couple of years for hospitality, hasn't it? What are you expecting to hear from MMB later on?
Yes, you're right. So it has been definitely a tough couple of years, but things have been improving more recently. Like-for-like sales have been growing compared to pre-pandemic, which is good news. But what we are seeing is that growth is starting to slow. That growth isn't proving to be enough to offset rising energy prices, labour cost, reduced customer spending. So, the atmosphere and the environment in which these pubs are trying to operate right now is extremely challenging. And I think if we look towards the outlook as well, that cost of living crisis is expected to intensify. Inflation is still double digits and interest rates are rising. So the outlook is very uncertain for those companies that depend on sort of consumer spending. Now, we've seen the share price in this sector as a whole has it dropped to a low in October, but they've actually just rebounded over the last couple of months. But I think what's for sure is that the outlook, I think the first quarter of 2023 is going to be very difficult for these businesses.
The World Cup, though, is surely good for pubs. We heard from Marston's yesterday, didn't we, that their takings on the days when there have been England matches on, they were up about 50%. So England staying in the tournament for longer is certainly good for pubs in England.
Exactly. It's so interesting because we see this with the Euro as well. It tends to be more barbecues because it tends to be more the summertime. But definitely, when England is playing and the longer they stay in the competition, the better it's going to be for these businesses and the economy as a whole, because that will help people get out spending.
Yeah, I'm meant to be going to a do this coming Saturday, a Christmas do with some friends. It starts at 7:00 in a place without a television, so I need to come up with an excuse on how I can wriggle out of that so I can watch the England-France game. Let's move away a bit from pubs then, because there is this suggestion that the Chancellor could be about to reveal a package of reforms to relax regulations in the City of London. Now, this is something that has long been talked about. Brexit has enabled the government to set its own rules for the financial services sector. What kind of things would you and your colleagues like to see, and what do you reckon you're going to hear from the Chancellor?
Oh, it's a good question. I think this is something that's really been needed in the sense to sort of improve the speed at which businesses can be carried out and sort of just remove some of that red tape. I mean, I think it's a very difficult line to walk down, because obviously you don't want to remove so much red tape that things become perhaps too relaxed. And
well, yeah, I was going to challenge you on that, because one person's red tape is another person's kind of safety rope, right? Because
exactly,
the financial crisis might seem a long time ago. But in an awful lot of ways, we can still see the impacts of it.
Exactly. So, and I think that's one of the things that they will need to be very, very aware about. And this is a subject as well, as you mentioned, that, has been discussed now for a very long time. It's been going back for months and months, back in May, there was talk of weakening city regulation sort of to improve business post-Brexit. But I think, as you said, it's going to be a very fine line. You don't want to be sort of removing regulation to the extent that it does actually put off some businesses from coming towards the UK, because that is one of the reasons as well that it does attract businesses, is because of that level of regulation that there is. So, it's going to be a very difficult one that I think Sunak will need to be careful with what he comes out with. On the other hand, there are going to be plenty of businesses that say sort of, removing that regulation will help sort of quicker speed up operations, and which can be a benefit for the UK as well.
The voice of the UK. This is 5 Live.
You're live on Radio 5 Live.
A huge goal.
Hey, listen.
Listen live on digital, online, smart speaker, or the BBC Sounds app.
Very good morning to you. It is 25 to 6. You're listening to Wake Up to Money with me, Rob Young. We're also joined today by Serene Mancha, Chief Executive of the web platform Travel Scotland, and Fiona Sin-Cotter, a market analyst at City Index. We'll be chatting to them in just a bit. Before that, though, we're going to talk about the rail row, which continues to rumble on as the government urged the RMT union to take the latest pay offer seriously. This is what the government minister, Nick Gibb, told the BBC.
It's very disappointing that the RMT think that the way to conduct these negotiations is through holding the country to ransom and affecting the Christmas plans of your listener, as well as hundreds of thousands of people up and down the country. It is not a way to conduct negotiations, and we would urge the RMT to call off their strikes.
Well, the RMT has announced strikes from 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve until the 27th of December. The latest offer was 8% over 2 years by the Rail Delivery Group. That was rejected by the RMT. Its boss, Mick Lynch, apologised for the disruption but said action was necessary as companies were planning to impose contractual changes on staff. We're going to talk to Clayton Clive now, who is one of those rail workers who will be striking. He works as a conductor. He's also branch secretary for the RMT union in South Manchester. Morning to you, Clayton. Welcome to the programme. What is your issue with the pay offer, the terms and conditions that are being offered?
Yeah, it's there's key points that are detrimental to like me personally as a railway worker. That haven't really been put out into the public, but all members have seen them. And one of them is that all workforce changes are accepted without reservation or industrial action. So if we accept the deal at train companies, we then allow the employers to do whatever they want with no industrial action as a threat if we don't like what they're doing. A mass job severance program and driver-only operation in all companies and on all passenger services, which would mean if I accept 4% this year and 4% next year, by April 2024, I probably won't have a job. So it's not really an offer at all, is it? It's backing you into a corner to accept a pay cut and also no job. It's not an offer. It's an offer for the sake of the government being able to say that an offer was made before Christmas.
So for you then, it's not about the pay offer at all then? It's about the other stuff. If the other stuff wasn't on the table, would this pay offer be acceptable to you?
And not really, not to me personally. I wouldn't see myself voting for that pay offer of 4% this year when inflation is now, who knows where it is. I can't keep up.
Yeah, I think it's just over 11%.
Yeah, so it's a 7% pay cut for this year, and then who knows what it would be next year. I wouldn't ever consider voting for an offer where I was going to cut my own pay.
When you go on strike, though, you will lose pay, won't you?
Yeah, and I've done that before as well. I used to be a conductor for Northern, so I had 47 days on strike at Northern. So the vast time I'm on the railway, I joined the railway in 2016. The vast majority of the time I've been on strike, apart from probably during the pandemic. That was the only time. So for that vast majority of time, it's felt like the companies and the government have wanted to get rid of my job. And I've had to fight to keep that job. And there's long-term gain, although I'm going to lose money and I have to not treat myself as much, or maybe we don't go on holiday. The long-term gain is that I will still have a job on a personal level, but also beyond that, it's, I care about the railway. It's an industry I work in, and I know the damage it will do removing frontline staff.
You're a conductor, and you know the row that's been rumbling for a number of years about your role. There are train services that do operate without a second member of staff on board. Do you regard those services as unsafe, or do you think it does actually work in other parts of the network?
It is less safe, without any doubt, because as we
so
saw
you wouldn't
in
travel on those
Stonehaven,
services yourself as a passenger?
Luckily, I don't. I live in the north of England, so it's not something I have to concern myself with. But yeah, it is less safe. You've got someone, only the driver on board. The other person on board doesn't have any safety responsibility. So, like we saw what happened in Stonehaven, it was the conductor that used their training and their safety competency to get emergency services to that scene. But also it does damage to communities. I think the Association of British Commuters said 11% of Britain's stations now deny turn up and go travel to disabled people because of driver-only operation and unstaffed stations. And that is unacceptable, that disabled people should be cut off from being able to go to their local station and get where they need to go. And the government knows this, they just don't care. And it's like the method of operation now is only to extract profit from the system and not to provide a service that is for the economy and for passengers. Like I think it's every pound invested in the railway is a benefit of £4 or £5 for the economy. So to have an argument that money should be taken out of the railway and costs should be cut rather than we should be investing at this time is entirely backwards to me.
I'm sure the government and the rail companies would say that they do care about their passengers. But when it comes to the potential number of strike days you might have ahead, particularly over an expensive time of year, not just when it comes to the cost of Christmas, but also, as we've been talking about on the programme today, energy bills as well, do you think to yourself, actually, we won't be able to get through all of these strike days. I'll just not be able to miss maybe a dozen or so days of work because that's just too much money to lose?
It's not something that I personally consider. I think the money to lose in the short term, or maybe the payday in January, where I think we'll have to scrimp by a bit, is necessary if my job is going to exist.
And what do you say to those passengers or people are, would-be passengers who might not be able to get to see friends and family this Christmas? Their plans may be disrupted, in some cases completely ruined because of strike action.
There's a kind of camaraderie on the railway at the moment with how bad the service is being run between railway workers and passengers in most cases, where we're all very fed up and we can all see how bad it is. And no worker on the railway wants to inconvenience passengers. But this is the only power that we have in terms of getting negotiations rather than getting things enforced on us. And like most railway workers, if not all railway workers, go to work and they just want to work and do their job and get their job done. Like you go to work and you want everything to work. You don't want to get to work and see all these trains cancelled, and it comes down to you being the person there in front of everyone saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," for something that is entirely beyond your control. And I think passengers can see how bad it is, and I think a good majority of passengers as well understand that if the cuts go through the way the DfT wants them to, in terms of maintenance staff being cut, frontline railway workers being cut, driver-only operation and so on, it'll be detrimental to them and to the railway as a service in the future as well. So I hope they can understand why we're doing it, and that it's not something that we want to do, but ultimately, unless an offer is made that is acceptable, then it's going to happen.
Thank you. Clayton Clive there, who works as a conductor on the railways and is one of those who will be striking if those strike days go ahead. We'll be talking about this story, as you can imagine, an awful lot in the coming days and weeks. Zareen Mancher, you run the web platform Travel Scotland. An awful lot of people do like to travel around Scotland and to Scotland for New Year, don't they? Do you expect these strikes to have an impact on that, on tourism in Scotland?
Absolutely, 100%. We already seen some of the impact on it over the last year, over the last few months. There have been strikes, and we've seen that actually it's been very understaffed because as a result of it. I completely support the right for railway workers to demand for better pay and working conditions. I think the cost of living has pushed that pressure even more, and the urgency even more for people to demand better pay and working conditions. My concern, though, is that it's the timing, I guess, for a lot of people, a lot of unions, not just the railways. You've got the Royal Mail, nurses, the buses that are striking in December as well. And so it's all of these conditions, not just the one, will inconvenience people in a way where it will impact their travel arrangements or get-togethers in general over Christmas and even the New Year. And for businesses who are already struggling, I think, that first week of January, we see that there's a few days of strikes in that first week of January as well. And I believe that is, for businesses, it may just be a strike off where they are working from the 9th of January onwards, by the looks of it.
Fiona Cincotta, is there an economic impact, a broader impact on companies, on the economy from these kinds of strikes?
Yes, I mean there is, and I think as we've mentioned here, the timing is absolutely key, and also if we think about the businesses that are going to be affected, it tends to be those that sort of are in that service sector, retailers, restaurants, pubs, the sort of plans that if people have made and then they see that there's going to be a strike on that day, that just get cancelled. And so it's those businesses that we've said that have had really, really tough couple of years. And they know they're going to have a very tough couple of months at the start of 2023. And there's this hope that sort of, we might have this last hurrah of spending. And that could be affected. And so, there are a lot of small businesses, which are going to be affected because of that.
Now, the front page of the Financial Times this morning reports that there is pressure on the Prime Minister to rush through anti-strike legislation. The paper says Tory MPs have asked why the government has not moved faster to keep the railways running during action. And while the negotiations between the unions and the companies appear to have stalled, temporary workers could be drafted in to plug some of the gaps. That is because the government changed the law in July to allow skilled staff to step in, and it has put increased demand on recruitment agencies such as Berry Recruitment, one of the bigger suppliers of contract rail staff in the UK. And we can speak to Mohammed Rouf, who is the head of rail at Berry Recruitment. Morning to you, Mohammed.
Good morning.
How difficult is it then to fill these vacancies, given that these people need to have the required skills and training, don't they?
Yeah, good morning. The difficulty was in the beginning when the strikes were actually begun. However, we do feel that over the period of time, it's now, how can I put this, become the norm now. So I think, the rail companies and agencies like ourselves, we've got contingency plans in place now, and we are finding it easier as time goes on, because unfortunately for us, it's it's happening every so often now.
So you're having conversations, are you, at the moment with train operators about what roles you might be able to cover in the coming weeks?
No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we've had discussions and meetings, and I think we pretty much know now the types of staff that are required. Clearly we can't supply, everyone everywhere. So the people that are actually striking right now, they are of a very high skill set. So what we tend to do is, supply staff that can go out on the network and help out and basically just keep things moving and try to aid our clients in providing us less disruption as possible, really.
Can you give us a sense of how many roles you're trying to fill and what types of jobs they are?
Numbers wise, it's quite a tricky one, but in terms of roles, we're looking at customer service, we're looking at train dispatch, and also security staff as well, really.
Okay, and where do you find the people to fill these gaps? If they are skilled, trained people, I presume they do have other work, do they?
Yes, I mean, we used to go through the old process, the old mill of advertising positions, but for us as a business now, that's becoming less and less needy. Now we've got a really big database of candidates that we tend to dip into, and for us now, we find that referrals are a really, really big source. So we've got a number of individuals working for these train operating companies. They tend to recommend people to us who have got previous experience of the particular roles. So we get in contact with them through that means. And that's really powerful because, people don't normally tend to recommend someone who they feel, wouldn't tarnish their name in terms of their reputation. So we find that to be quite effective.
Thank you, Mohammed Rouf there, the head of rail at Berry Recruitment. And of course, you can hear all sides of this discussion about the railway strikes and indeed the other strikes across the economy at the moment here on 5 Live and on the BBC website. We're going to speak to our business reporter Katie Silver in Singapore now, who is monitoring what is going on in China, where there has just been a nationwide easing of coronavirus restrictions announced. You'll remember those big anti-zero COVID, anti-government protests that rocked various big Chinese cities, a week or so ago. Katie, what is the government saying?
That's right. So there's new anti-COVID measures basically that are being eased up. So, for instance, patients with no symptoms or mild symptoms will be going to be able to do home quarantine if they've got circumstances that they can home quarantine in. They're also scrapping COVID test rules in many public venues other than hospitals and schools. banning COVID movement restrictions across different regions. And they're also going to define more precisely what they consider high-risk zones. They're also, for example, going to be pushing vaccination rates for elderly people. And that's, of course, been one of the major concerns. Many have been saying, for instance, that we may see about 1 million deaths in China, given if we see a quick surge in cases, particularly because the elderly community is many unvaccinated. So they're going to be pushing that as well. And they're also saying, and this is quite revolutionary, is that schools are going to be remaining open if there's no outbreak on the campus. So quite a number of measures. And as you say, quite a quick turnaround from a country that's had a very staunch zero COVID policy and then these big protests in the last week.
Yeah, so China then is adopting policies much more like most of the rest of the world has. The idea that you would close a school for a couple of COVID cases in a country like the UK, for example, we haven't had that for a very long time. So the Chinese authorities then, are they responding to those protests? Is that what this is? It's not a democracy, but they've seen the anger on the streets and they decided to change. Or is it perhaps more about the impact that the COVID lockdowns have been having on China's economy?
Well, I'm not President Xi Jinping, so I can't tell you, but it could be very well within a mixture of those two. So as we talked about, those protests were widespread, and we haven't seen that level of kind of dissent, as well as how vocal they were in China in decades. So no doubt they are potentially having an impact, but we have seen as well today the impact that it's having on the country's economy. So we heard, for example, trade data out today that's suggesting imports and exports are at their lowest levels since basically the early days of the pandemic. Huge drops in the order of about 8 to 10% across both of those. And what that suggests is it shows just the impact that these restrictions are having. For instance, with imports dropping that low, it shows that people aren't out consuming things, and that's going to have a flow-on impact onto the economic growth. We're hearing, for instance, that we might see it in the order of about 3.5% when they had been setting a target in the order of about 5.5%. And exports were also down, and that's because we've seen huge disruptions to factories across the country as a result of these snap lockdowns and quarantine restrictions. We've been talking for weeks about the impact on the factory that makes most of the world's iPhones in the Zhengzhou province. Huge scenes of unrest, protesters, trying to escape, workers trying to escape what they see as, very hard quarantine measures, being forced to eat in their dormitories. And so that's having a huge impact on the world's second largest economy.
Thank you, Katie Silver there in Singapore. China is, as Katie said, they're the world's second largest economy, and therefore what happens there does have an impact in much of the rest of the world. Fiona Cincotta, analyst at City Index. Does the easing of these COVID restrictions in China, do you think, mean better potential economic times ahead for the world? Because it had been having a big impact, hadn't it?
That's right. I mean, it'd been one of those sort of massive uncertainties that we'd been sort of facing across the year. When was China going to sort of reinforce strict, when were we going to see the next big breakout in China? And therefore, when were those strict measures going to come in? And as you said, it showed in the economic data. We've seen economic data from China has really taken a hit every time they've gone into these periods of sort of, lockdown restrictions and strict COVID curbs. And the big effect here that we've been seeing is also on the supply chains. Supply chains were hurt dramatically during the pandemic, as sort of, which was then felt in companies and stores across the world, and also sort of contributed to that inflation, the high inflation that we've had. So, an easing of these measures in China is going to help improve supply chains, which is can only be a good thing as far as industry across the globe is concerned, but is also good news for the inflationary picture as well.
Okay, well, that is indeed good news. Right, let's talk a bit about the cinema, because the long-awaited sequel to Avatar is out next week, just in time for the Christmas holidays, of course. And here's a little bit of what you can expect.
The way of water connects all things. Before your birth, and after your death.
Well, Avatar, The Way of the Water is said to be the fourth most expensive film ever made. It is 13 years since the sci-fi tale of Suri and Neytiri blew us away with its special effects, but in these austere times, can a megabucks film really make all that money back? We can speak to Patrick von Siechowski, the editor of Celluloid Junkie, the online publication for cinema industry news and analysis. He actually joins us from the Thai capital Bangkok, where he's attending an industry convention. Welcome to the programme, Patrick. Celluloid Junkie, are these films still on celluloid? I assume they'd all be digital these days.
Oh no, it's all gone digital a long time ago.
But you've kept the old
with the
name.
exception of
£285 million is an awful lot of money for a film, isn't it? Do you think there is a danger it might not make that back?
No, it'll definitely make the money back. The expectation is it going to be as big as James Cameron's previous two films, Titanic and Avatar 1. And the signs are good because China is reopening its cinemas. There's a huge anticipation all over the world. And we've seen with films like Top Gun Maverick and Minions and Jurassic World that people are starting to return to the cinema for the big kind of tentpole titles.
You used the word start there, didn't you? Starting to return to the cinema. So numbers aren't anywhere like they were in 2019 pre-pandemic?
No, they weren't. We're not getting there yet. But it's worth remembering that 2019 was the biggest box office year in the 125-year history of cinema. So, we'll be happy if we're up to 2018 or 2017 levels first.
People have got used to watching films at home, haven't they, on ever bigger tellies with ever better sound systems. Do you think people might just wait to watch it on a streaming service, or do you reckon people will head to the cinema? Because you're right, the first Avatar film was huge. Is your sense that this one is perhaps not going to be as huge?
Well, people have gotten used to getting food delivery to the home, and it's, in theory, the same meal, and it's maybe a little bit cheaper, but it's not the same experience as going to a restaurant and having an evening out. And if you talk a film like Avatar, you want to watch it on the biggest screen with the best sound. So, in IMAX, in 4DX, in these kind of formats, which, however good and big your LCD TVs at home, it's not going to compete with that kind of screen. And that's what I think people want, to be immersed in a film, in a world like Avatar's Pandora.
You've had a bit of a sneak preview of some of the scenes, haven't you? I know you're not allowed to reveal what goes on, but what did you think of it? Did you think, I really can't wait to go and watch this?
Well, he's definitely, we've waited a long time, 15 years, and James Cameron hasn't wasted the time. He's been pushing the sort of envelope of technology even further. I mean, the first Avatar is impressive, but he's definitely gone to town on this one, and I think people are going to be in for a treat. So that's all I'm allowed to say. I'm under NDA for having watched the bits I've seen. Right, but you can't. You're itching to go then. That's good to hear. When do you think cinema attendance briefly will get back to where it was pre-pandemic? It's probably going to take another year or two, to be honest. The problem is not just it hasn't gone up to bed, but we haven't had the big tentpoles. They've been pushed back to next year and beyond because of constraints on visual effects. So there's been a bit of a shortage of films. Thank you, Patrick. Next year or the year after. Thank you, Patrick von Siechowski there. We've been talking about the weather this morning. We've had a text in from Norfolk. It's going to be a 3-fleece lined jeans, bobble hat, builder's boots and fleece socks day, apparently, in Norfolk.
Wake up to money from BBC 5 Live.
Hi, I'm Dr. Julia Shaw. And I'm Sophie Hagen. Our podcast, Bad People, is back for a new season. Every week, we combine true crime and research from criminal psychology to investigate the deliciously dark question: why do people do bad things? In this season, we dig into questions like, can video games ever cause violence?
I mean, how are you meant to react to that?
Do doctors need dark humor?
No, I never ever want to hear that again.
And what rights does a dead body have?
That is horrible.
Bad People is back. Listen on BBC Sounds.
This week on the podcast Spark and Fire, visual artist Mark Bradford.
People always ask, well, didn't you know when you were in 5th grade and you were creative?
Mark has to learn how to embrace himself as an artist and find what he needs to create.
I didn't grow up like that. Thought it was just Mark being Mark.
On Spark and Fire, creators from different fields share their stories to fuel your creativity. Spark and